In the 20th century, Ukraine endured immense turmoil in its struggle for independence. Divided between Russian and Austrian rule, Ukrainians faced cultural oppression but nurtured growing nationalist aspirations. World War I devastated the region, forcing Ukrainians to fight on opposing sides. The 1917 Russian Revolution offered hope, leading to the brief establishment of the Ukrainian People's Republic, but internal conflicts and foreign invasions crushed these dreams by 1921. Under Soviet control, Ukraine suffered the Holodomor famine and Stalin's purges. During World War II, Ukrainians were caught between Nazi and Soviet forces, facing atrocities from both. Despite immense suffering, the fight for freedom endured. Let's travel to the history. The dawn of the 20th century, Ukraine under Russian and Austrian rule. As the 20th century began, Ukraine was still divided between two empires. Eastern Ukraine, under Russian rule, Ukrainians faced harsh Russification policies. Schools, literature, and even church services were forced into Russian. Any attempts to promote Ukrainian culture were suppressed. Western Ukraine, under Austrian rule, Ukrainians had more cultural freedoms but were dominated by the Polish aristocracy. However, nationalist movements, especially in Galicia, were growing stronger. Despite oppression, the Ukrainian national consciousness continued to rise. Inspired by movements across Europe, Ukrainians dreamed of independence, but the road ahead would be filled with war, revolution, and tragedy. In 1914, World War I erupted, and Ukraine found itself caught between the Russian and Austro-Hungarian empires. Ukrainian men were forced to fight on both sides, brother against brother, in a war they did not choose. The Eastern Front ran straight through Ukraine, devastating towns and villages. The Russian Empire viewed Ukrainian nationalists as potential traitors and began mass arrests. In Austrian-ruled Galicia, Ukrainians were suspected of loyalty to Russia and sent to brutal internment camps. As the war dragged on, Ukrainians realized something: neither empire cared for their people or their future. The dream of an independent Ukraine became stronger than ever. The Russian Revolution and Ukraine's chance for freedom. Indiana 1917, the Russian Empire collapsed. The Bolshevik Revolution overthrew the Tsar, and suddenly, Ukraine had a chance to break free. In Kiev, Ukrainian leaders declared the creation of the Ukrainian People's Republic, UPR, an independent state. It was a time of hope and celebration, but Ukraine's struggle had just begun. The Bolsheviks wanted Ukraine as part of their new communist state. The White Army, anti-Bolshevik forces, wanted to restore the Russian Empire. Poland wanted to expand into Ukrainian territory. Ukraine was caught in the middle of a brutal civil war, fighting off Bolsheviks, White Russians, Polish forces, and even local warlords. Symon Petliura and the fight for independence. One of Ukraine's key leaders during this time was Symon Petliura, a military commander who tried to unite Ukraine against all enemies. He fought to defend Ukraine from the Bolshevik Red Army, establish an independent Ukrainian government, protect Ukrainian people from foreign domination. But the odds were against Ukraine. The Bolsheviks, with their powerful Red Army, launched a massive invasion. Kiev fell, and by 1921, most of Ukraine was under Soviet control. Western Ukraine, meanwhile, was taken by Poland, Romania, and Czechoslovakia, meaning Ukraine remained divided and occupied. The dream of a free Ukraine had been crushed, but not forever. With Ukraine under Soviet rule, the Ukrainian Soviet Socialist Republic, UKRSSR, was created in 1922 as part of the newly formed Soviet Union. At first, Ukrainians hoped for some autonomy under communism, but soon, Stalin's brutal policies would turn Ukraine into a land of terror and suffering. In the early 1930s, Stalin imposed collectivization, forcing Ukrainian peasants to give up their land and grain to the Soviet state. When they resisted, Stalin punished them with starvation. The result was the Holodomor, a man-made famine that killed an estimated 4 to 7 million Ukrainians. Entire villages perished. People were eating grass, tree bark, even their own animals to survive. The Soviet government blocked all aid and denied the famine was happening. To this day, Ukrainians remember the Holodomor as a genocide, a deliberate attempt to destroy the Ukrainian nation. Stalin's terror campaign targeted Ukrainian intellectuals, artists, and anyone suspected of nationalist ideas. Thousands were executed or sent to Siberian gulags. The goal was clear: erase Ukrainian identity and turn Ukraine into a submissive Soviet republic. In 1939, World War II began, and Ukraine became a battleground between Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union. In western Ukraine, the Soviet Union occupied Galicia after a secret deal with Hitler. In 1941, Hitler betrayed Stalin and invaded Ukraine. Ukrainians were caught between two brutal regimes, the Nazis and the Soviets. Some Ukrainians, seeing Stalin as their greatest enemy, initially welcomed the Germans, hoping for an independent Ukraine. But Hitler had no intention of freeing Ukraine. Instead, he viewed Ukrainians as slaves for the German Reich. The Nazis massacred civilians, burned villages, and sent millions of Ukrainians to forced labor camps. The Holocaust in Ukraine saw the murder of over 1.5 million Jews by Nazi death squads. Meanwhile, the Ukrainian Insurgent Army, UPA, led by Stepan Bandera, fought against both the Nazis and Soviets in a desperate bid for Ukrainian independence. By 1944, the Soviets pushed the Germans out, and Ukraine was once again under Stalin's iron grip. By the end of World War II, Ukraine had suffered millions of deaths, brutal oppression, and the destruction of its cities and culture. The dream of independence had been crushed time and time again, but Ukrainians never gave up. The seeds of resistance had been planted. The fight for a free Ukraine was far from over.